have the Dybbuk box, a normal object turned supernatural turned cursed. What a journey. The Dybbuk box is said to be a haunted wine cabinet filled with a restless spirit. Interestingly, the wine cabinet had a Jewish prayer carved into the back of it, which is maybe what attracted the ghoul. The spirit in question is allegedly a Holocaust survivor, Haveka, who escaped to Spain. The box was famously sold on eBay in 2003 and has spent the past 16 years bouncing between owners who don't want it, and I can understand why. It seems each owner has fallen on horrifying misfortune and suffered reoccurring nightmares. One owner suffered a stroke shortly after receiving the box as a gift. Apparently the box has now been hidden by Jewish rabbis, thank goodness. The box actually has a connected film with it, The Possession, which came out in 2012. I think it was based on the wine box events. Have the Occult Museum voodoo dolls. Voodoo dolls in general are supernatural items. They're little effigies created in magical kind of practices, and for the person on the receiving end, they're bad juju. Pins are placed in the doll in order to harm the subject, which isn't great, not great at all. So with that in mind, a supernatural object used to invoke a curse, do you want to see the voodoo dolls from the Ed and Lorraine Warren Museum? Guys, you don't know how hard it is to say Ed and Lorraine Warren in one go. It's a tongue twister. Ed and Lorraine Warren. Either way, voodoo dolls. So there is actually a noose on the neck of one of the dolls, which kind of indicates that somebody might have died. The other one has its eyes gouged out, which isn't great either. Visually scary, but also actually scary. It seems that the doll collector came across these dolls and brought them home, only to find that her son's health began deteriorating. It seems that some of the witch's voodoo doll magic had been retained, and it was picked up the boy as a new vessel. The collector contacted the Warrens, who removed the doll, after which the boy made a full recovery, thank goodness. However, it seems that the story continues. There was a visitor to the museum and they broke the rules by touching one of the dolls, and later they were involved in a horrifying accident. Who's to blame here? Bassano vase. At first, the Bassano vase is a sight to behold. It's a beautifully carved silver vase from the 15th century. It's an antique. But as it's on this list, you may have realised that actually it's a supernatural antique with a curse. Hurrah! The story goes that the vase was made for an Italian wedding as a gift to the bride, who is to be wed in a traditional ceremony in Napoli. On her wedding night, she was excited, but unfortunately an intruder broke in and stabbed her. She was found bleeding to death, clutching the vase. The legend has it that she promised to return and seek vengeance on the person who stopped her marrying her love. After her death, the vase was passed down through the family, but anyone who came in contact with it mysteriously fell ill, or they were met with serious misfortune. Following that, the vase was wrapped up and packed away, but unfortunately it was unearthed again hundreds of years later in the late 80s, when it also started making headlines for continuing its spate of deadly bad luck. Newspaper reports indicate that the vase was buried again in an undisclosed location, hoping that it would stay out of the way with human contact forever this time. Evil Eye. The curse of the evil eye. Although actually, this is an interesting twist at this point, because these objects actually protect against curses. The evil eye is a curse cast by a malevolent and malicious glare given to a person when they aren't looking. If an evil eye is cast upon you, you are susceptible to injury or misfortune. It could even mean that you're set upon by animals. To protect yourself from the evil eye, usually people carry a talisman with an eye on it, which in themselves look pretty terrifying, but actually they're there to stare down a curse. The evil eye has been incorporated into a lot of protective objects, most popularly jewellery. Also, there are a lot of evil eye wall hangings and wind chimes. cursed tarot cards. Tarot cards are used in divination, for forecasting rather than predicting. Usually a person formulates a question and seeks an answer from the cards, a deck of 78 individual cards with different meanings. The most famous cards are Death, the Tower, and the Devil, all thought to be bad omens, but of course that depends on your interpretation. Some people are convinced that their tarot decks can become cursed and that everything that's forecast will actually happen badly. There is also a superstition that burning tarot cards will bring a curse upon you. It seems that the only way to be rid of a cursed deck of tarots is to drown them, soak them all face down in water. Honestly, I'm not so sure about that. Maori masks. Maori is the name of the indigenous people of New Zealand and Polynesia. Masks are made to honour their ancestors, and they're often beautifully carved and slightly intimidating to look at. The masks are thought to contain the souls of warriors who died in battle, so pretty supernatural and ghostly if you ask me. While men are fine to be going around touching a Maori mask, females have a much more uncertain time. Legend has it you should never seek out a Maori mask if you're pregnant or menstruating, because you could invoke an ancient curse. In October 2010, a museum in New Zealand made headlines when it told a pregnant woman to stay away from the sacred artifacts. Uluru. Is a rock formation an object? Either way, I'm putting it on this list. Uluru, or Ayers Rock, is both sacred and cursed, if the stories are to be believed. The large sandstone monolith in the Northern Territory of Central Australia is sacred to Aboriginal tribes, the first people of the land. They believe that it is inhabited by the ancestral spirits of the land. The rock started forming 550 million years ago, and it's believed that if a visitor takes a rock from the spot, they will suffer serious misfortune, sometimes even grave misfortune. There have been reports of people returning stones that they've taken from Ayers Rock to try and end their suffering. Shouldn't be taking the rocks in the first place. The Terracotta Army. I kind of believe that the Terracotta Army have an air of the supernatural about them. They were, after all, a work of funeral art that were buried with the purpose of protecting an emperor in the afterlife. The thousands of terracotta figures were buried with the first emperor of China in 210 BCE, but they were rediscovered by local farmers thousands of years later in 1974 in Yang Village's rural land. For them though, the discovery was actually a curse. The government didn't pay them well for their findings, and then they took their land and their homes off them in order to build a tourist centre. The government made a lot of money, they didn't. One of the farmers who discovered the soldiers actually killed himself, and the others were met with bad luck, many of whom have died penniless. Whatever you do, do not touch the Demon Book. The Book of Soiga is an early 16th century treatise on demonology written in Latin. There are only 2 copies of the book in the world known to us, and one was possessed by the Elizabethan scholar John Dee. Dee spent his life trying to interpret the text, which was filled with spells and rituals. He had a good understanding of what was happening, apart from the final 36 pages, which he just couldn't decipher. He and his trusted friend Edward Kelly summoned the spirit of Uriel to tell them the meaning of the last pages. The legend says that Uriel then possessed Kelly and spoke through him. He claimed that the book came into existence when Adam entered paradise, and that it could only be properly interpreted by the Archangel Michael himself. He also said that whoever deciphers the meaning of the last 36 pages will be destined to die 2.5 years later. We have the Delhi Purple Sapphire. Also known as the Gem of Sorrow, the Delhi Purple Sapphire was housed in a sacred temple in India, the Temple of Indra in Kanpur. Indra, by the way, is the Hindu god of war and thunderstorms. Amid the British-led turmoil in India, it wasn't uncommon for soldiers to loot sacred temples, stealing their jewels and smuggling them back to Britain. This is exactly what happened with the purple sapphire in question. Colonel W. Ferris took it back to England only to be met with terrible luck. Financial misfortunes befell him, his family got very sick, things started to fall apart. He gave the stone away, and the person who received it committed suicide. The next owner of the sapphire was Edward Heron Allen, who was also met with really bad luck. He bound the stone with silver and attached 2 scarab beetles, and it seemed like the bad luck was contained. However, his dreams were frequently haunted by Hindu yogis until he gave the stone away. The stone then was returned to him, so he threw it in Regent's Canal in London. No prizes for guessing that actually it came back. The story continues over another 100 or so years. More recently, it found its way to a museum, and one night the museum curator was travelling with the stone only to be injured by a terrible storm with his wife.